Well, it is a pleasure and thank you for joining us once again. In this next episode, we'll be discussing matters of politics, election, and the economy of Uganda. You can never talk about the economy and you fail to talk about the politics. We have just concluded the presidential race and other different levels of leadership in our country. But we'll be discussing that and more with Mr. Katabazi, the Executive Director of Center for Budget Policy. Mr. Katabazi, you're welcome and thank you for joining us.
The pleasure is mine. And greetings to our viewers and listeners.
In your perspective, how has the election been from your area of expertise?
For my experience, and particularly in the area that I voted from, the election was peaceful. The people were expected to win, won. Those who were expected to lose, lost. So, but that is only one district in the so many districts in Uganda. So that's what I can say about.
Let's look at the economy before the election. How was it? How was it performing before we look at now the post?
So we cannot ably and 100% tag the economic performance on elections this time around, simply because even before the election was called, we had significant challenges arising out of COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic brought in unprecedented economic challenges, namely that most companies laid off employees, and the economic life of many communities, especially in urban centers, was disrupted. You recall, people were described as people who eat from hand to mouth. The economic livelihood for over 6 months was significantly disrupted. Those are drivers, taxi drivers, bus drivers, border boarders, and also small-scale business enterprises, because for the better part of 2020, most of the businesses were in a lockdown. And that in itself shows that the economic activity at the micro level was constrained. Now there enters the issue of elections. Elections generally, in Uganda's perspective, tend to have pressure on the economy generally,
Okay.
on the macro generally. I say that because my calculation, based on the GDP figures for 2006, 2011, 2016, tend to reveal a slump of GDP growth during the election cycle. And that is precisely because the election cycle usually brings its own dynamics. There are some enterprises that shoot up, especially those in printing, stationery and printing.
Because of the election?
Because of the elections.
Okay.
But there are some other people who realign, who shift from their productive ventures to election fanfare. You have some musicians previously, those who abandoned their trade now to concentrate on the campaign trail for various candidates. So there are also many people, especially at the micro level, who instead of concentrating on the productive activities, they get caught up in the frenzy. They are moving from one rally to the other, and that in a way hampers the production. And I think that could be the reason why there's a slump. But also the other reason is that there are some economic activities that are tagged to speculation.
Okay.
All over the world.
What are these economic activities that you're talking about?
All over the world, generally, elections cause triggers and anxiety in the economy. And that, in many cases, tend to compel people to withhold their investments and wait after elections concluded. Those include those who want to do foreign direct investments, those who want to invest in our local markets, in long-term investments, treasury bills and bonds, and many other instruments that are in the country. The other category of people, as a matter of fact, are those who would want to make some investments, but are not sure on the likely outcome of the elections.
Okay.
And to that very extent, those tend to say, I am going to make this commitment after after the election. So when you combine the election fanfare and the anxiety that comes with elections generally all over the world, then it can be said that an election year tends to have reduced or suppressed economic activity based on the GDP numbers, as has been the case before. But I was only saying that this year, this election cycle, it is extremely difficult to separate what ostensibly is the cause of COVID-19 and is the cause of the election cycle. Because generally speaking, this election has been like no other. There's not been a lot of fanfare except in a few isolated cases. And the meetings have been largely scientific in many areas. But I can see still, in my view, a COVID-19 cloud hovering over our economy. A cloud that is thicker than that would potentially be, that would be more than what would be potentially the election cycle cloud.
Okay.
So we can say you'll have some little bit of cloud on the economy emanating from the election. But the bigger cloud, in my view, is the COVID-19 cloud.
Okay.
And we shall still see some constrained, for example, some constrained economic activities arising out of the measures, the COVID-19 measures in many areas. For example, bars are projected to remain closed.
Closed up to now.
The education sector, they say they are opening up, but we do not know how to open up. And you remember, in the education sector, quite a number of these enterprises, quite a number of these schools, private owned schools, had come up. And these feed into the local economics. Why? You have quite a number of people who work at those education institutions. You have suppliers for beans, for posho, for firewood. And this is money that directly streams into the community. So bars aside, education institutions aside, the bigger entertainment industry is still in the lockdown. So once we do not have a clear path for a vaccine in Uganda, then we can only say that the election cycle may have added just a little bit of anxiety in our macroeconomic setup. But the bigger issue will be the impact of COVID-19 and how, going forward, the country is going to tackle COVID-19 pandemic. But even when I have said that, I still want to say that the economic fundamentals are still very strong.
What are these economic fundamentals you seem to be asserting
The
to?
bedrock of economic fundamentals is found in the sectors of the economy and the subsectors. The question of the day should be, is our banking industry robust? Do we envisage in the medium term that the banking industry will collapse? The answer is we expect the banking industry to remain afloat.
Even amidst the challenges?
Yes, amidst these challenges. In fact, it is reported that during COVID-19 pandemic, more banks reported profits as opposed to losses that people were imagining. What I see, for instance, in the banking industry as an area of concern largely is that there are some loans that may not be performing, arising out of the fact that some of the lenders were premised servicing loans on the income stream from certain businesses. So if one of those businesses is in the education sector, is in an entertainment, general entertainment sector, and many other sectors that have struggled, then it follows the case that such an investor or such a borrower may not sustain a loan because of the income stream that has been adversely affected. But I expect the banking industry to remain sound.
Even amidst the challenges?
Amidst the challenges.
Okay.
I expect the insurance sector to remain sound. I expect the pension sector, including the NSSF, to remain robust. Although, of course, tricky employment opportunities or inadequate employment opportunities definitely have a bearing on how much money they can be able to realize and to invest. But I expect that to normalize as the pandemic wanes, and assuming that we'll have a vaccine that will cover a majority of the population.
And what does it therefore mean that
Now, the other fundamental before I go to that is that agriculture. Even when we have had this pandemic, the agriculture sector, in my view, especially for production of food, remained open. We still had food that comes to Kampala. We still have a food that goes to many other areas. So we expect the agriculture sector to keep performing. We expect the service industry to remain strong. There will be some adjustments, of course, moving to digital service delivery mechanisms as opposed to physical delivery mechanism, or as opposed to the money of doing things. We'll see some benefits. We've seen some benefits in deliveries, in online businesses. We have seen some improvements in some products that were not relevant but are now relevant now, in the sanitizers area, and many other supporting COVID-related supporting businesses. So by and large, the service industry, people going to work, in the banking, in the insurance sector, in the offices, the service industry will be able to shrug off, in my view, the effects that we see today. Then the manufacturing industry, we've seen the president opening quite a number of factories. We hope that those will make a significant contribution. We also hope that the international community, exports and the imports, the foreign investors will still think of Uganda as an investment destination.
Okay.
And we still hope so, because I have not seen triggers in the international community that is looking at Uganda adversely, or that has taken a position that Uganda is not an economic destination. So the foreign direct investments may not perform strongly in the short term, but we expect the medium term to even out, and by probably the third year of the new term, we will be able to have seen a tremendous development in that area. But that still remains a projection.
You've rightly put it that these sectors will continue in performance, given the fact that they won't be making profits. So where does this leave, especially the members that are subscribed to some of these sectors that you've put it? Especially the sectors like the banking sector, the manufacturers, those will continue in operation, the insurance sector. But in terms of general output, you seem to be saying they will not be performing very well. So where does this leave the members that subscribe to most of these associations?
No, I think for me the most important thing is for an entity to make profits. Once an entity makes profits, no matter how little they are, then it is what they call a going concern. To that very extent, its future in the market remains sustainable. And for an investor, that is the primary concern. So now once it has ability to keep afloat, then the issue of increasing income will definitely come up once these challenges in the economy, particularly the COVID-19 economy, are overcome. So the members, the leaders of those institutions are basically supposed to manage expectations from the investors to keep them assured that along the way there is light at the end of the tunnel, which I see. This is not only a case for Uganda, it's a case for most of the countries around the world. Optimism is, in my view, what I think is necessary.
Okay. But what explains the fact, Mr. Katabaz, we've seen countries going through polls, we've had Kenya, but their economies have continued being stable. So what explains the situations in Uganda where we go through different elections and our economy devastates in one way or the other?
I don't wish to say that, I have stated that during the election cycle, for the last 3 election cycles, we register a slump in GDP, I do not wish to say that that amounts to devastation in the economy. It is simply a slump. And I have given reasons why it is a slump. This slump happens in the United States of America, happens in Kenya, happens in all these countries because we're in a global village. Election creates anxiety for investors all over the world, including me and you. If you have some amount of money that you want to use to buy a piece of land, you might want to see how things will play out after
the elections.
Because elections stoke emotions, as you know. And some people are always eager to see what comes out. But once the winners have been announced and the available legal channels for those who would wish to contest, then it is usually the case that after about 6 months, those anxieties calm down and the situation, even 6 months is a lot. So within 6 months, I expect the emotions to have calmed down and for people to refocus their energies on production. So I think Kenya has been overcoming a very emotional elections. And I don't think we have reached the level of the Kenyan elections in the first place.
That's what you think?
Yes, that's what I think. We've not reached that level. Because the Kenyan elections are usually so emotional because of their voting demographic. There it is alliances that work, and alliances are based on regions.
Which may or isn't the case here in Uganda.
Yeah, so in Uganda, you have a candidate who gets votes all over the country.
Let's look at the meaning.
Okay. And that, in my view, thinks that if there is anxiety, disagreements, and any election-related conflicts that arise, aware of the fact that we've had properly functioning court system, usually some of those anxieties wither. Within a space of 4 months, 6 months, people have already focused on something else.
Okay.
And I am hoping that this will be the case.
But some also we've been through an election period, but the president has been going ahead, launching a number of factories, launching a number of market areas. What does this mean still to the economy? Yes, it's been through an election period, but there's a number of factors, a number of things that have still continued going on.
Yes, an election does not mean that life should stop. Launching factories is a demonstration that despite the challenges that are on the horizon, we are making progress in the area of value addition, in the area of employment creation, in an area of export promotion. Because it is value addition that is a key ingredient in export promotion. You are not going to sell what other people have. You sell outside to other countries what they don't have. But even when they don't have a product, if you are to sustain yourself in the market, it must be a quality product that you're selling. So the president going around launching factories and markets, in my view, is a positive step. Okay. It actually means that irrespective of the outcome of the election, then the economy is built.
Some perceive it as like as though it was a political strategy. You seem to be saying it.
Yes, even if it is a political strategy, it would be a correct political strategy because it demonstrates government continuity, but also it is demonstrating that all areas of life in the country are alive and well. It means that the economic question is alive, the political question is alive. If you're a leader and you can able to demonstrate what you are doing about an aspect of value addition, an aspect of employment creation, then in my view, even if it is for political gain, but there's also a contribution that has been made because an employee who gets a job arising out of the factory, and an investor who makes money, the president or the minister or the area MP may not directly benefit, but the local person might benefit from getting a risk. So it ultimately now addresses, in my view, the question relating to alleviating poverty, putting money back in the households, because and every candidate I think who has an opportunity would definitely do that. Okay. Yes, because you saw in America as an example, Joe Biden in the previous Obama administration after that recession, touting the rebooting of General Motors. That their economic recovery program, what we call economic stimulus at the time, was able to keep the banking industry afloat, was able to keep the auto industry afloat, and was a major campaign tool. Yes, so if a politician takes advantage of the key success that they have registered in a given term, I don't think there's any problem with that. I don't think there's any problem with that.
Let's look at finally, as we plan to conclude our discussion. You are an expert when it comes to the issues of budgeting. Each and every other, the budget of Uganda continues to hike and up. We are operating now at 45.5 budgetary allocation for 2021. So what does this mean now? What impact does this have on the budgetary process come this year?
I know that some people are concerned about the budgeting process because we have leaders who are going to be sworn in May, June.
And those will be 1 or 2 months.
And that will be probably a month towards a new financial year. Now, I want to say that the framers of the Constitution and ultimately then the framers of the Public Finance Management Act had that in mind. And what they provided for was that the parliament that approves the budget is the parliament that starts the budgeting process. The budgeting process for the financial year 2020-2021 started on the 1st of July 2020. And according to the law, by 30th of December, the budget framework paper, which is a budget foundational document, was sent to Parliament. It is my anticipation that Parliament right now is in the process of interrogating the National Budget Framework paper to give a foundation for the national budget. This is the Parliament that is in force right now, not the ones that were elected. So what will happen is that by 1st of February, the Parliament of Uganda is expected to have passed the National Budget Framework paper, and the other upstream processes then would begin. Construction of budget estimates, ministerial policy statements, and the Appropriation Act or the Appropriation Bill at that stage will then be put in place to ensure that by the 30th of May, that is before some of these chaps come in, the new ones come in, the budget will have been what? Will have been approved.
In fact, the members you're talking about, some of them have lost, and others have been up and down the election. So what time have they had to prepare this?
Yes, but you know members of parliament don't prepare the budget. Members of the parliament approve the budget. So even when you have had politicians running up and down, the technocrats have been making consultations. We've had, for example, local government budget consultative workshops. We have sector working groups, joint sector reviews. We've had donor working groups consultations. Then we will have the national budget consultative workshops. All those took place before 15th of November last year.
Okay.
So it means that the budget for 2021-22 is already in shape. What it needs to do is to go to Parliament and those other processes to take into account a few things that could be moderated, that could be improved, that could be fine-tuned, and then we have the national budget.
I find it unwise that the new parliament is going to operate on a budget that maybe they've not participated in.
But you see the role of parliament, you need first of all appreciate who constructs the national budget. It's the executive. And who is the executive? The executive is the president.
And the ministers.
Ministers and all other officers of government who are not in parliament or judiciary. So including the Gombora chief or sub-county chief is part of the executive.
Okay. So what do we expect?
So what happens is that all those, you see, politicians can go away. The MPs are not executive, part of executive.
They are not.
So ministers are only part of executive if they are performing a function that translates what has been processed by the entire department, the entire executive department, permanent secretaries, commissioners, directors, chief administrative officers into action. Once they are playing that role, that's when they are part of. But if they're crossing over to parliament and they are holding their personal views, then they will be lawmakers. So the president, once the president has put in place, once the cabinet head by the president have agreed on the priorities and the technical people have come up with the priorities, then that budget, in my view, is valid. The question would be that what would happen if actually you had a different president or a different political.
That was the most then fundamental question.
Yes, in power.
In case Mayambala went through, what would be the situation be like?
Now, the budget, national budget is not a casting stone.
Okay.
In fact, the Public Finance Management Act provides that a party or a president in power, rather voted, must submit to Parliament a charter of fiscal responsibility for the subsequent 5 years. That charter of fiscal responsibility is supposed to highlight the economic direction of that particular party or president. And the first year, although passed by the previous parliament, still has mechanisms embedded in to make some corrections. Our budget by construction is not substantially complex. What do I say? Okay. The biggest percentage of the clear-cut figures is on administrative expenditure, largely on salaries and what? And wages. Even if we had 10 presidents in 2 years, we don't expect so much to change on the issue of salaries and wages. Okay. So what would then left to probably think would be development expenditure. But also you might note that a big chunk of development expenditure has a donor loan component. And that is also very specific in many circumstances. And also that being the case, a new leader might say we are rejecting this loan, but also has implications. So, but cannot say, since we got a loan for a power line of area B, and it is part of the agreement, or it is even a grant, that you as a new leader are going to change it and put it somewhere else. Because by the time they get a loan, it is going to Parliament, and there are legal processes that are conducted there, which binds the country on that particular loan. So even if we had a new president, there would be many windows. Number one, the Charter of Fiscal Responsibility, together with mechanisms such as supplementary budgeting, would be, in my view, adequate avenues for making some corrections in the budget. So a national budget, whereas it's a very important instrument, in some cases, it is not casting stone. If circumstances happen, emergencies, natural calamities, change of leadership that tinkers on priorities, supplementary budgeting is one of the mechanisms that any government can use to correct some of the excesses, okay, or to bring on board some interventions. But it's also important to note that even if we got new leadership, the budgeting process and the allocations may not significantly change so much, because the budgeting process and the priorities are anchored on the National Development Plan, which the National Development Plan is for 5 years. So even if we got a new president, that president would have to budget to provide for key elements of his manifesto within the framework of the National Development Plan. That's what the law says. And the law and the National Development Plan has a very realistic path for key priorities and interventions of government. So what can change is probably how much money you can allocate to that, how you can budgetize certain interventions, but they have a framework. And if something falls outside that framework, it would need a very, very strong justifications to have it included. So by and large, whereas there would be some concerns relating to how does a new regime implement a budget that has been set by the predecessor. It's a genuine concern, but the law and the policy we have provides for mechanisms of addressing something like that. One can be through the Charter of Fiscal Responsibility for the subsequent financial years, but also the supplementary financing environments that are embedded within intrasector allocations are very important in fine-tuning certain programs, in moving money from one program to the other.
And then finally, to the layman, to Omuntu wa wansi, how do you encourage them to probably go through this period when their finances are basically upset, as we plan to wind up, Mr. Katabazi?
No, I would expect the government, now the election is done, to be very frugal. To be very frugal in spending. To be mindful on expenditure.
There's government, but there's also this Omuntu wa wansi who must spend and earn.
So the same, once we have urged government to be very frugal in spending, then the same applies to Omuntu wa wansi. That the money you have today is very important. And how you use it determines on whether you will keep it or add much more or lose it completely. Okay. And once you cannot address the expenditure side of it, no matter how much money you hold, then most likely you are going to keep in a vicious cycle of brokenness. And during this particular period, it would be very important for people to hold on their savings and spend sparingly. And thankfully, there are not many now exciting things. Entertainment industry is still frozen a bit. So there may not be so many areas that should be consuming people's incomes. So I would recommend that as we look forward to recovering from COVID-19 impacts and the election cycle anxiety, it would be prudent that people spend wisely, people invest wisely, so that at the end of the day, there are economic activities that are ongoing, but also there is a value for money element in the expenditure pattern.
Your final and general conclusive.
So my general conclusion is that elections are over, and those who still have grievances, the court systems are open, and I'm sure they should be ready to entertain legal challenges. And the rest of other players,
those who have lost and those who have gone through.
Yes, the rest of other players, those who are not, if you are not a candidate, or even if you're a candidate but you don't have any grievances, my strong view is that this is the time to now concentrate on yourself, because you realize that somebody who has been voted to a member of parliament his life is going to change tremendously. They'll be entitled to a very high salary. There will be VIPs. Possibly their children will be in better schools. They will access excellent medical care in Uganda and abroad. And as such, you, the campaign agent or the ordinary voter, it is at this time that you need to reflect and say, okay, yes, we have economically liberated this one. He's going to work for us, but he's also going to be elevated politically and economically. And now it is time for the ordinary voter to also think about self-elevation. Okay. For you as voters, you have elevated this person. But then you also need to see how you can be elevated socially, politically, and economically. But the most important thing, in my view, is economic empowerment. And that, of course, follows that if the existing government programs and you can participate so that you can improve your economics at the local level.
Okay.
And if there are some income generative activities that you've been having but neglected to participate in politics, in politicking, this is the right time to now give full attention now that you are candidate either won or lost.
Mr. Katabazi Patrick, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us.
Pleasure is mine.
And dear viewer, thank you for being part and parcel of this broadcast. A lot has been said by Mr. Katabazi. I hope this will never leave your life the same again. My name is Fred Makubya. Stay tuned to Smart 24 TV.